What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Super Bowl. Top DFS picks.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay, guys, NFL Super Bowl. Let's take a look at this NFL Super Bowl showdown between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. So at the quarterback position, I like Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts has he's averaged 26.7 fantasy points per game on the season. And I like this pick because he's getting an average of 11 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 71% owned, projected at 26.2 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's 11,200 DraftKings salary. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game. They have the Eagles favored by 1.5, and Jalen Hurts has scored 15, 24, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And he got 11, 9, and 9 rush attempts in those games. So not the best fantasy playoff run for Jalen Hurts. But if you compare that to Patrick Mahomes over the last 3 games, their fantasy point average is pretty similar. So Jalen Hurts scored 15, 24, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Patrick Mahomes scored 24, 17, and 15 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Now, we know Patrick Mahomes had a banged up ankle, but it didn't stop him from putting up 24 fantasy points last game. He got 3 rush attempts as well. And now he's going to have, this extra time, a couple of weeks to rest that ankle. So I don't think that ankle's going to be a big concern come the Super Bowl. So I do like both of these quarterbacks. Now, Patrick Mahomes is 11,000 DraftKings salary, going to be about 62% owned, averaging 27 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.6 rush attempts per game. He's projected at 28.6 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's 11,000 DraftKings salary, so Jalen Hurts 11,200. Both of them priced just about the same, but now Jalen Hurts has a much better matchup here as the Philadelphia Eagles have a good defense overall and they've been good versus opposing quarterbacks. So out of these two guys, I do think Jalen Hurts has more upside because of the matchup, because of those rushing attempts. So I like Jalen Hurts here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So last week or last playoff game, the least likely suspect put up a pretty good game here. Miles Sanders scored 18 fantasy points off of 11 rush attempts and 1 pass target. But I don't know if I'm going to be buying into Miles Sanders. They got him priced up at 7,800 DraftKings salary. So he's the most expensive running back on the slate. And Isaiah Pacheco at 7,200 DraftKings salary. Jerick McKinnon at 6,800. Kenneth Gainwell at 5,000. Boston Scott at 3,000. So you got a lot of running backs for the Philadelphia Eagles. You got 3 running backs that got touches in the last playoff game. And then for the Kansas City Chiefs, you got 2 running backs. You got Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon. So the running back position is kind of a hard one. There's no super stud on the slate at the running back position. I'm gonna shy away from Miles Sanders at 7,800. I think that last game was the outlier. He hasn't scored too much really in the playoffs. He does have the better matchup, as the Kansas City Chiefs have the 9th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Even though actually the Philadelphia Eagles are a little bit worse defending opposing running backs, but they do have a better defense overall. So you can go ahead and play any of these guys really. Miles Sanders, Isaiah Pacheco. I think one of those two needs to find their way into your lineup. And then after that, you're looking at Jerick McKinnon or Kenneth Gainwell. So let me just shine the spotlight here on Kenneth Gainwell from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing running backs.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Kenneth Gainwell has averaged, now he's only averaged 5.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.1 rush attempts per game and 1.7 pass targets per game. But take a look at his last 2 games in the playoffs. He scored 9 and 22 fantasy points off of 14 and 12 rush attempts on top of 3 and 2 pass targets. So he got 17 rush attempts last game. He got 17 touches last game. He got 14 touches the game before that. So he got more touches than did Miles Sanders last game. Now, Miles Sanders is the guy who scored a couple of touchdowns, but that very easily could have been Kenneth Gainwell. Kenneth Gainwell had only 5,000 DraftKings salary, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here at the Super Bowl. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game. Eagles favored by 1.5, and he's got a good matchup here. So I do think he's a good value play. If you just kind of want to gloss over this running back position, you could plug in Isaiah Pacheco and Kenneth Gainwell, not spend too much salary here. But I'll be honest with you guys, this running back position for the Super Bowl, not really super exciting. Let me just go over Isaiah Pacheco, because out of the 2 backs from the Kansas City Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon, I do prefer Isaiah Pacheco, who scored 14, 11, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 10, 12, and 8 rush attempts on top of 6, 1, and 0 pass targets. So it was nice to see Isaiah Pacheco involved in the passing game last game, with Patrick Mahomes hindered a little bit with that ankle, wanting to dump the ball off to his running backs. So it's nice to see Isaiah Pacheco with 6 pass targets, scored 14 fantasy points, second highest scoring running back on the slate last playoff game behind Miles Sanders. He's projected at 15 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. That's the highest projection out of any running back. He's 7,200 DraftKings salary, scored over double digit fantasy points in all 3 of his last games. So I like Isaiah Pacheco here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Let me just run through the ownership real quick. So Miles Sanders, about 17% ownership. Isaiah Pacheco, about 24%. Jerick McKinnon, about 24%. And then the sleeper pick of the slate, I think, is Kenneth Gainwell at only 8% ownership. A guy who got 17 touches last game and scored 22 fantasy points the game before that off of 14 touches. So Kenneth Gainwell, I just have a feeling this guy's going to get a lot of work once again in the Super Bowl. He's been earning those playoff carries. So I like Kenneth Gainwell as my favorite value play at the running back position here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Okay, guys, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So, you got the studs on the slate from the Philadelphia Eagles. You have A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Let's go over A.J. Brown, who's playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall, give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. A.J. Brown has averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.6 pass targets per game. Going to be about 43% owned, projected at 18.8 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's $9,200 DraftKings salary. Now, A.J. Brown has scored 7, 5, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 6, and 10 pass targets. Now, these Philadelphia Eagles wide receivers do have a good matchup here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So I like A.J. Brown here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, coming down in salary a little bit, and I would argue he's possibly a better play than A.J. Brown this week or for the Super Bowl. So I like Devonta Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Kansas City Chiefs. Devonta Smith has averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 92% of the snaps. Compare that to A.J. Brown at 85% of the snaps. I think it's just worth noting there that he is on the field more than A.J. Brown on average. And he's going to be about 43% owned, projected at 15.2 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's $8,600 DraftKings salary. Devonta Smith has scored 6, 18, and 14 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 3, 10, and 8 pass targets. Now, I think last week he's not going to get 3 pass targets again. That was an off game. Probably one of his worst games that he's played in a long time. Of course, they still ended up winning the game, so it didn't matter. Their touchdowns came from the running back position for the most part. So the passing game wasn't as important for the Eagles last game. But I think it will be for sure here versus the Kansas City Chiefs, who will put pressure on them to score the ball. And they've got a good wide receiver matchup, so they're going to take advantage here of the weak Kansas City defense.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
So I like Devonta Smith here versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, for the Kansas City Chiefs, you got an interesting wide receiver position here. Juju Smith-Schuster was injured. He's questionable, did not practice. Got to keep an eye on him. If he sits out for the Super Bowl, that's going to open up some pass targets for Marquez Valdes-Scantling from the Kansas City Chiefs, who's averaging 7.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.8 pass targets per game. Now, he's only going to be about 14% owned if Juju Smith-Schuster plays. Because if Juju Smith-Schuster plays, you're looking at Juju Smith-Schuster at $5,600 and Marquez Valdes-Scantling at $6,200. So, based on the season average numbers, probably I would go with Juju Smith-Schuster if he plays. But I have a feeling you're going to have plenty of salary on the slate. So let's just take a look at this here. Marquez Valdes-Scantling scored 27, 8, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 2, and 6 pass targets. Juju Smith-Schuster scored 2, 5, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 1, 2, and 2 pass targets. But you got to think if Juju Smith-Schuster is healthy here, he is going to get the majority of the pass targets. We'll see what happens. So I just keep an eye on the injury news for Juju Smith-Schuster. If Juju is in, I like Juju. If Juju is out, I like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So the wide receiver position really thin for the Kansas City Chiefs. You can go all the way down here for Kadarius Toney, who did not practice either. He was also injured last game, so you got to keep an eye on these wide receivers from the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll go over all the injuries in our final look video the day of or the day before the Super Bowl. So if Kadarius Toney does play, you got to consider him at 4,400 DraftKings salary. Scored 2, 10, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 2, 7, and 2 pass targets, on top of 0, 1, and 3 rush attempts. So he's going to be about 19% owned. I think he's got some potential here. Let's say a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster sits out and Kadarius Toney is a go. Now go ahead. You could go Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Kadarius Toney if you wanted to stack a couple of wide receivers with Patrick Mahomes. But the main beneficiary or the main pass catcher for Patrick Mahomes, of course, is going to be none other than Travis Kelce. Let's take a look at the tight end position. So Travis Kelce from the Kansas City Chiefs. Now the Eagles do have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. And Travis Kelce has averaged 19.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.9 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 80% of the snaps, going to be about 56% owned, projected at 20.9 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's 10,600 DraftKings salary. Travis Kelce has scored 21, 36, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 8, 17, and 7 pass targets. So with the injuries at the wide receiver position, Patrick Mahomes certainly could be forcing the ball quite a bit to Travis Kelce. He could easily have over 10 pass targets in this game. So I like Travis Kelce here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Okay, the other tight end on the slate, I think is pretty good play here, is Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles, playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They also give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So good tight end matchup here for Dallas Goedert, who's averaged 11.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.8 pass targets per game. He's been on the field for 90% of the snaps, going to be about 38% owned, projected at 12.7 fantasy points here in the Super Bowl. He's 6,400 DraftKings salary, and he scored 7, 17, and 11 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 6, 5, and 7 pass targets. So I like Dallas Goedert here versus the Kansas City Chiefs.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.